Welcome to a new episode of the Sustainability Channel. I'm Thomas Stanley and I'm your host. Let's start today's news update by having a look at an article from Reuters, and it's on climate change funding talks stuck ahead of COP29 summit. With just 5 months to go before this year's UN climate summit, countries cannot agree on the size of a global funding bill to help the developing world fight climate change, let alone how to split it. The decision is set to dominate at COP29 climate talks in Azerbaijan in November, where nearly 200 countries need to agree on a new annual financing target for helping poorer countries cut their emissions and protect their societies in a harsher, hotter world. The new target will replace the yearly $100 billion that rich countries had pledged in climate finance from 2020. That goal was met 2 years late. But preliminary talks this week in Bonn, Germany, have yielded no major breakthroughs. Instead, the talks again expose the unyielding rifts among the world's biggest economies over who should be paying most to fight climate change and how much. Speaking at the end of the talks on Thursday, UN climate chief Simon Steele lamented the slow progress and said governments' ministers would need to intervene to help unstick the talks ahead of COP29. And he says, "We've left ourselves with a very steep mountain to climb." Representatives from climate vulnerable nations said it was hard watching wealthy nations fall late with past payments of climate finance while quickly approving new funds for military responses to war or spending billions subsidizing CO2 emitting energy sources. The elephant in the negotiation rooms, some diplomats told Reuters, was the upcoming US presidential election in which Donald Trump is seeking to return to office. The previous Trump administration pulled the world's biggest economy out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Negotiators said they worry a future Trump administration could halt US climate finance payments, leaving it to other wealthy nations to meet the annual pledge. India and a group of Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt, have said the overall financing target should exceed $1 trillion per year to reflect the spiraling needs of poorer countries as climate change worsens. The Arab countries propose that rich nations provide $441 billion in public funding per year in grants to leverage a total $1.1 trillion per year from broader sources. But countries are also at odds over who should contribute. There are about 24 long industrialized countries currently obliged to contribute to UN climate finance. That list was decided during UN climate talks in 1992, when China's economy was still smaller than Italy's. The EU wants China, now the world's biggest CO2 emitter and second biggest economy, and high wealth per capita Middle Eastern countries to contribute for the new goal. The US has also argued for adding more countries in the donor base. However, the Arab countries and China firmly oppose this idea, with Beijing reiterating China's status as a developing country under the UN Climate Convention. So let's continue with an article from the Climate Action Tracker, and it's a guide to a good 2035 climate target. For a second year in a row, the world continues to break temperature records as greenhouse gas emissions rise, leading to more extreme heat and flooding events that are taking lives and displacing many around the globe. Governments are expected to submit their climate targets or new nationally determined contributions, NDCs, by early 2025, with targets for 2035. However, the Climate Action Tracker analysis have continued to show that both individual country and collective mitigation ambition for 2030 targets is not in line with the level of action needed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Of even more concern, governments are not implementing enough policies and actions to meet even those insufficient targets. From November this year, national governments need to submit 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned 2035 NDC targets, but for the world to meet the Paris Agreement's 1.5 temperature goal, they need to move to emergency mode and strengthen the ambition of their 2030 NDC targets and current policy action. Targets and action for 2030 need to align with the pathway to net CO2 zero emissions by 2050 globally, which should also then define the NDC targets for 2035. A failure to substantially increasing the ambition of current 2030 targets and action would mean limiting peak global warming to 1.5 degrees would not be possible and would likely lead to a multi-decadal high overshoot of this limit, even if followed by strong 2035 targets. In this briefing, the Climate Action Tracker highlights the 4 key elements for what is needed from the next round of NDCs for 2035. They need to be ambitious, fair, credible, transparent, and include aspects of climate finance and a just and fair transition. So let's have a look at these 4 key elements for good climate targets that the Climate Action Tracker has developed. On the first place, it's ambition. Unless 2030 levels of action rapidly improve, limiting peak global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will very likely not be possible and would lead to a multi-decadal high overshoot. It's vital that governments first strengthen 2030 targets, then deliver 1.5 aligned 2035 targets, with strong renewables and other sectoral targets and matching policy action. On second place, finance and fairness. And as we have reported from the previous article, developed countries must significantly scale up climate finance and other means of support. Both donors and recipients must transparently communicate contributions and needs. On third place, credibility. Governments should ground NDCs in robust sector-based planning, ramp up implementation, eliminate contradictory policies supporting fossil fuel exploration and subsidies. And on fourth place, transparency. Governments should set absolute economy-wide targets, clearly delineating the planned use of carbon sinks, other removals and markets to create clear, transparent targets immune to creative accounting. Please read the whole list on the Climate Action Tracker website for more details. And lastly, we have an article from the World Economic Forum that are reporting on the University Impact Rankings of 2024, the world's top universities for delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. So what do Arizona State University in the US and the UK's University of Manchester have in common with Nigeria's Afe Babalola University, Indonesia's Universitas Airlangga, and South Korea's Kyungpook National University? They have all just been named as world-leading universities in the latest global university rankings. That's right. The Times Higher Education Impact Rankings are different to the more traditional rankings. They assess universities' social and economic impact based on an evaluation of the contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through their research and teaching, their outreach to businesses and policymakers, and through the stewardship of their own resources, primarily their people and estates. The impact rankings include 17 individual rankings for each one of the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals and an overall ranking on top. And the results highlight a highly diverse, international and sometimes surprising range of high-impact universities, often outside the traditional elite names. Arizona State University has been named as the world #1 university for SDG 14, Life Below Water, thanks in part to innovative degree programs and research in its School of Ocean Futures, as well as pioneering coral reef restoration nursery in Hawaii. The University of Manchester has taken the world top spot for SDG 11 Sustainable Cities and Communities, while Afe Babalola is the #1 in the world for SDG 7 Affordable and Clean Energy, with a great deal of credit going to its international policy leadership on energy, driven partly by its Hydrogen Research Institute. Universitas Airlangga earned the top ranking for SDG 1, Zero Poverty, which includes an assessment of research on the eradication of poverty as well as real-world support for its own students and community, while Kyungpook National University leads the world for SDG 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth. As well as taking the world #1 position for its leadership on protecting life underwater, Arizona State University also makes the world's top 10 of the overall impact ranking, which is based on universities' performance across their 3 top performing SDGs and their compulsory submission to SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals. The overall world #1 for the 3rd year in a row is Western Sydney University in Australia, followed by the University of Manchester and Australia's Tasmanian University in joint 2nd place, and Denmark's Aalborg University in 4th. The data highlights some insightful geopolitical trends. German universities, for example, are leading the world for SDG 9, Innovation, Industry and Infrastructure, where the rankings measure research output linked to industry partners, industry funding, patents, the site university research, and university spin-out companies. Australia leads on SDG 6, Clean Water, with 7 world top 10 universities. South Korea leads on SDG 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth, and the United Kingdom dominates the ranking for SDG 12, Responsible Consumption and Production. The UK has a remarkable 8 of the world's top 10 places for this SDG, with King's College London sharing the top ranking with Bournemouth University. Congratulations to all those universities doing such a great job. That's all for today. Over and out, and live a sustainable life.